Welcome back to the week of Try to Guess the Theme by the End. Boy, DeformationSpace really likes the fact that their name is awful, right? Like they are just reveling in the fact that they sound like a knockoff company. To that end, they named this figure, no joke, Recording Alliance. They named a single character, Recording Alliance. This guy is an alliance. DeformationSpace, you make a good product, but your names are amazingly terrible, and I can't tell if it's intentional. Also, before I get into it, I want to point out that yes, I am aware of the rumor that DeformationSpace is actually just Transform Element under a different name. It would make sense based on their original Starscream that thing shares design cues with Transform Element's other work. It's DeformationSpace Blaster. How insane is it that this is their second product? They bash out 3 Seekers in record time, which would be really irritating if they weren't the best ones on the market and at a good price, and then they immediately make Blaster? No Coneheads? Difficult with the mold, I understand. No Blitzwing, no Soundwave? Honestly, I kind of thought they were going to be an aerial vehicle specialist with a name like that, but how do you start off on the big 3 Decepticons and then just jump to Blaster? I'm not ungrateful, I'm just confused. If you recall, when I first talked about this thing's reveal, which wasn't even that long ago, they kind of announced this thing and then by the end of the month it was out. But back then I was telling you not to fear. The colors were weird, but it was a render. And I was right. But man, that render was doing a good job emulating what it was supposed to look like. The colors on this guy are strange. I happen to find them none too bad, but the whole thing is covered in this matte scheme, and I'm not quite sure what they were going for. I can kind of see these colors being accurate to the show in a weird way, with how it could look washed out from time to time, but that is a bit of a stretch. Now the good news is that once we get past the colors, which will be a contentious issue I'm sure, even if I think it looks okay, this is awesome. It honestly kind of puts their Starscream to shame. This thing has 2 minor visual problems that aren't the colors, and to honor Blaster, I will try to describe the first one in song as he would want. They tried to make me go to rehab, but my legs were too long. Did I do it right? Yeah, this boy has some gams on. They have to be this long so he can transform, but I don't actually think that's true. I feel like these could have been on some extenders to get them as long as they are needed for the alt mode. To be fair, it's not the worst, these are just a little too long. We don't have a Masterpiece Megatron thing going on here where his body is like 2/3 leg. The second visual problem is that he very blatantly doesn't have a normal waist. He has a waist, but the whole body is built very unnaturally. It's a minor issue, but one I find causes me to give this figure sidelong glances. There is no denying that this is the way he is supposed to look, but you may find it a bit strange. Once we are past that though, oh boy does this look good. People like to say that without a ton of added sculpting detail, that a Transformers figure will look too boring to want. I can say that I fundamentally disagree with that, because looking at this just makes me very happy. He's got detail, but he's not awash in it. Honestly, it's all pretty directly ripped from the screen. He's got absolutely every line the way it was drawn on the character model, no matter what. And he's even got these extra pad things along the sides of his legs, and I'm unsure if these are faux forming. Like, are these supposed to be something, or are they just part of the robot design? They've gone out of their way to make sure the paint doesn't get in the way of the figure by doing stuff like painting half the joints at the elbow. And one thing I really appreciate about this guy is the bottoms of his feet are pads that do not appear on the sides of the alt mode. So even if they get scuffed up, it's just the bottoms of the feet, unlike the MP Soundwave, where they make up some of the most visible and important parts of the alt mode. Much like the Kingdom figure, the clear window on his chest is a separate plastic insert. So not only did they do it right, but they even went one step beyond, because the chest door is not opaque plastic. No, this is painted metal, so this might be the most robust chest door of all time. Speaking of which, 1, it opens by pressing the switch down this time. That is so fucking satisfying. 2, do not use the 2 tape holding gimmick. This is yet another figure where that feature just does not work and gets horribly stuck when you try. I don't know what's so hard about this feature, but at this point, they should just not try, because it's an extra effort, negative quality on every figure I've ever handled with it. And 3, if you like diecast, this guy has a fair amount. His chest door is obviously part of it, but the toes on his feet are diecast, as I think also are those pads on the bottoms of his feet. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I don't give a damn about diecast. People talk about the satisfying weight of the figures that have it, but it's a fake weight. The figures are not more durable because of it. Literally everything else could be brittle like glass, and it would feel the same because of the diecast. If it's in the feet, it can help some figures stand, though it makes it kind of impossible to get them to stand on only one foot, but outside that little benefit, there's no true value in diecast. I'd honestly almost prefer to never have it personally. I think it works ever so slightly here because the chest windows are parts known to break, but if it was just opaque plastic with a clear insert, it would have probably been fine. Though if it is this part that makes the door so satisfying to open, then I'm glad I have it this time. And how did I get this far into the review of this thing without saying that it looks perfect? This is one of the most kibble-free, cleanest looking figures of all time. A lot of the screws on the back are kind of extreme because they have washers calling attention to them, but outside that, this is something special on the sculpting front, and that extends to the face. Like I said last time, you can do a placid Blaster and not have it fail to look like an expression that he'd make, though I guess the Kingdom may be kind of going for the comic version, who was a super serial boy. But this has the immaculate white paint that needed, really capturing the character unlike the darker silvers of the kingdom. And it's got those glorious metallic painted eyes. They aren't quite chromed eyes, but they are the second best thing, looking stunning in almost every lighting imaginable, from darkness to barely illuminated to the studio lights I'm using right now. They look so good, and the head sculpt is just flawless. I don't have a single negative thing to say about the way this head looks, outside the fact that I can't quite figure out how to get it off to switch the faces. So this is basically a nearly perfect representation of the character in the looks department. The worst objective thing about him is the screws in the back, and that's nothing. Outside that, there are some subjective foibles, like the deco being a bit odd and the legs being too long and the crotch feeling unnatural, but there is a good chance that you don't care about those at all. And to be clear, this thing is also built phenomenally. There is nothing loose on this guy. Even with the diecast in the legs, they don't wobble at all. So it looks perfect. It's built to take a bomb, and it's got some really good accessories. He comes with his gun. I'd honestly say it's worse than the Siege's. It's more accurate, but it's a lot more boring, looking more plain than the figure itself. At least you can use the scope on this one. He comes with an alternate face. This thing is terrifying. Without the eyes and the dull expression where the mouth is hanging open, it feels like someone's flayed off face in a horror movie. Then he comes with the fist speakers he had that one time. These plug onto the backs of the fists when you have them transformed in, and they are fully painted. They look pretty good except for the parts where they were attached to the sprues. Then he comes with his best accessory, ram horn, whose little side things love falling off. This is very likely the best of the cassette-sized cassettes I've ever seen. These parts would work so good if they were just pinned on. I don't know why they're not. For posability, he's got tons of up and down at the head, able to get more than a full 180 in range, forward and back on the legs, with the separate double-hinged foot, tail, and then his cannons can swivel. Not the most articulated thing ever, but pretty good. And then the transformation on this guy is involved and rocks. If the side cannons weren't held on with spit and hope, they wouldn't even have to come off to transform. But otherwise, this is an interesting little process that produces a great tape. This stores in his chest, and it fits perfectly, which is kind of a problem since it's perfect. As in, there's no room for play at all, so it gets stuck. The good news is, if you didn't use the two tape gimmick, you can snake something through the back to knock the tape out easily, so it's not frustratingly stuck like with some other minion cannons. I want to point out that this guy is not like abnormally expensive for a third-party figure. He's only $140, which is bog standard. And yet, it comes with a good amount of awesome crap on top of looking awesome and posing awesome. Head has a bit more up than normal with a specialty joint that lets them get pretty much maximum up. I didn't use the voice because we all know what true maximum looks like. Shoulders can pull a bit more than a 90 if you use the lower hinge, which looks good, but there's also a hot rod hinge, which when used together lets the arms get almost straight up. And they can be used together for different types of poses as well. The forward rotations are on really nice ratchets, by the way. They have enough detents they don't limit you at all. I just thought people would want to know that. Double-jointed maximum elbows. That can be used in any order, unlike the Starscream. Majorly articulated hands, and you can fake a sword-wielding wrist. A really weird waist joint located just under the ribcage. Double ab crunch for some serious range with a really cool robo design. Legs have basically no movement whatsoever in any direction, so you have to drop them down on these weird hinging armatures that don't move how you'd think at all. But once you do, they are ratcheted and completely unimpeded forward and to the side, but can only pull a 45 going back. Knees pull a tiny amount more than a 90, and feet with some toe up and a rocker. That's one of the longer posability segments I've ever done, yet this doesn't have one of the highest amounts of posing I've ever covered. But there is still a ton here. Most of his joints have way more range than normal, and he's got a few specialty joints. He's a little limited in the legs, but just slightly, and overall, it's fantastic articulation. Transformation is also fantastic. This is way better on this front than their first figure. And while I contend that the Starscream isn't as bad as some people think once you get the hang of its very specific order of operations, this, on the other hand, is phenomenal. It is so much fun, and I had no trouble figuring it out without directions. Seriously, the first time I did this, it couldn't have taken me longer than 7 minutes. Some people might complain that it's panel heavy, but believe me, I've experienced panel heavy, and it's really more that this guy becomes a series of large flat planes. And it's all so much more understandable than that. Really, the most complex thing about him is how you have to hinge and then unhinge the ankle pivot during the leg transformation. There are Studio Series figures with harder transformations than this by a good margin. This isn't quite the soul-shredding guitar solo that is the MP Soundwave, but it is still really good. And what can I even say about the alt mode? It's perfect. The Kingdom already basically had no kibble, but this has even less if that's somehow even possible. The back of the boombox has like these two indents, and they don't even look like anything. They are just two flat parts that make it not flat all the way across the back. Otherwise, this is so gloriously perfect. I know I use the term jumped off the screen too often, but on this, it's a lot more true than normal. The paint job may have entirely been in the service of this mode. Gimmick still works, obviously. Every surface is smooth like it doesn't transform. Even the bottom isn't bad. I don't mean to sound like an idiot here, but there just isn't any more to say. It has no flaws. What am I supposed to talk about? Everything I try to point at, the only words I have are, that's correct. It doesn't have the Autobot symbol, but that's intentional. It's a third-party figure. The handle works better than on the Kingdom figure, which you just couldn't fit your fingers under, and I know that's a stupid thing to say, but it might matter to some people. Look, I can't think of anything to say because this alt mode is perfect, and perfection is kind of a boring thing to discuss. You can't talk about what there is to improve or why decisions were made that seem suboptimal on their surface but had to be done. In that instance, there is only, it is perfect. So perfection may be a boring thing to try to explain, but it is not boring to own. DeformationSpace has 2 figures under their belt, and I think they've made the definitive versions of both of them. This is a figure that looks flawless, pose is great, gimmick is great, accessories are great. For a masterpiece figure, it's not even expensive. I don't foresee anyone making a better blaster. If one is what you are after, this is the best you could honestly hope for. In every way, it is fantastic. There is no downside to this blaster. And so, the title masterpiece isn't good enough for this figure. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know you know what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.